Good morning, everybody. I hope you're having a splendid Thursday. Did anyone else get absolutely bonered this year on their taxes? I just finished my return and oof, what a doozy. Lately, I've done plenty of episodes focused around European eras and the evils they bred for centuries. And don't get me wrong, I thoroughly enjoy those topics, but every time I search for different quote-unquote eras, I missed out on so much more elsewhere. And in recently watching the amazing new show on Hulu, Shogun, I've been reminded of countless other stories to tell. The vast array of Egyptian or Mongolian periods, ancient Australia, home to the world's oldest continuous living culture, the convict period, kingdoms of Sir Blank or Lord Who's-a-What's-it, and of course the expansive, powerful dynasties. I fell into a deep hole researching some of these periods, the Vietnamese Civil Wars, East China versus West, or North pitted against South, the 10 Kingdoms, the 16 Kingdoms, the Warlord era, China's Golden Age, and just so much more I had never heard about prior, but one had caught my eye in particular. Today, I bring you the Lushan Rebellion, the bloodiest period in Chinese history, if not the world. My name is Eli, and this is Murder in the Morning. My sources for today come from History.com, the China Project, the World of Chinese site, and the rest I will put down below. Fair warning up top, there will be a lot more historical background today, but I promise you it's interesting. Pinky. To understand our story a bit better today and the Lushan Rebellion itself, let me take you back to the beginnings of China. Before even the first dynasty, there were 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors. In legend, the 3 sovereigns were demigods who used their abilities to help create mankind and impart essential skills and knowledge. The 5 emperors were powerful sages who possessed great moral character. According to Callie S. of ThoughtCo.com, they ruled between about 2800 BC and 2000 BC, or BCE, before the time of the Zhao dynasty, the first dynasty. These names and reigns are legendary more than they are strictly historical, of course. For example, the first sovereign, the Heavenly Sovereign, had 12 heads and ruled for 18,000 years. He also had 12 sons who helped him rule the world, and they divided humanity into different tribes to keep them organized. The Earthly Sovereign, who also lived for 18,000 years, had only 11 heads and caused the sun and moon to move in their proper orbits. He was the king of fire and created several famous Chinese mountain ranges. The final sovereign, the human sovereign, had only 7 heads. But he had the longest lifespan of all 3, 45,000 years. As for the emperors, legend says they were the ones to imagine the first musical instruments, ride by dragon, or create rice out of thin air. And after the 5 emperors, the first dynasty came about. As I mentioned above, the Zhao dynasty, quote, is said to have been the first true Chinese dynasty, described in the ancient bamboo annals called the Ji Tomb. According to records, the Zhao dynasty is thought to have lasted between around roughly 2000 BCE to 1600 BCE, and it was said to have been founded by a man known as Yu the Great, a descendant of the Yellow Emperor, one of the 5. The Zhao dynasty is said to be the first to irrigate, cast bronze, and build a powerful army. The fall of the Zhao is blamed on its last king, Ji, who is said to have fallen in love with an evil but beautiful woman and became a tyrant. The people rose up in rebellion under the leadership of Zi Lu, the Tang emperor and founder of the Shang dynasty, end quote. And for thousands of years, dynasties would rise and fall, emperors were loved and hated, an endless cycle, until our story of Lushan in the 6th century CE According to History.com, the Tang Dynasty is considered a golden age of Chinese arts and culture. In power from the year 618 to 906, the Tang-era China attracted an international reputation that spilled from its cities and, through the practice of Buddhism, spread its culture across much of Asia. As with any era, period, or dynasty, however, these times were not without its evils and turmoils. According to the World of Chinese website, from the Zhou dynasty of nearly 2000 BCE to the Qin dynasty of 200 BCE, physical punishment was institutionalized as the, quote, 5 punishments. They included tattooing the face or forehead, cutting off the nose, amputating the feet, removing reproductive organs, and finally death. According to the rites of Zhao, there were 500 crimes punishable by each of the 5 punishments. For example, anyone who disobeyed an order from the emperor, dabbled in theft, caused bodily harm, would have their nose cut off. Those who illegally used the emperor's carriage would have their feet removed, a very specific crime. On top of that, there were also many colorful and cruel methods of execution. A criminal could be boiled alive, beheaded and have their head displayed in public afterward, or even dragged by chariots at high speeds until their wrists and limbs were torn off. One of the most terrible penalties was literally all 5 punishments. The Book of Han explains that they would tattoo the face, cut off the nose, amputate both feet, kill them, cut off the head, and throw the body to the public, which was a little bit different than the 5 before, but it probably changed throughout history. Sometimes they would be even more creative. Quote, red embroidered shoes were iron shoes heated over flames until red hot and then forced onto the suspect's feet. But by far the worst punishment, in my opinion, is lin qing, or slow slicing. In front of large, angry, excited crowds, an executioner would begin slowly cutting or filleting the body with a knife, removing various body parts while keeping them alive. One man took half a day to die after receiving hundreds of cuts. According to some historical accounts, local residents collected these skinned body parts after these torture sessions had ended. Thankfully, this slow skinning was reserved for only the most, quote, heinous crimes such as high treason, homicide, or killing one's master. I feel like I could talk about this for the next hour. So much of this history is undiscovered to me from my American standpoint, and please tell me if it is boring to you, but I think it's interesting. Let me introduce you to our protagonist of today, or possibly antagonist, depending on how deep your family lineage may go. Anne Lushan, or An Lushan, referred to in the pages of history as, quote, an incredibly fat man, was born in the year 710, give or take a couple, during a time of brief peace. According to Britannica, the family name An, A-N, was derived from the Chinese name for Bukhara in present-day Uzbekistan. The given name Lushan is a form of the Iranian word Roshan, meaning light. Anne Lushan's ancestors belonged to a group who had been incorporated into the Eastern Turks, and his mother from a noble Turkish clan. The Eastern Turks, whose ancestry in Mongolia dated from the 6th century, had been conquered by the Chinese Emperor Taizong at the beginning of the Tang Dynasty, but had made themselves independent and were enjoying, like I said, renewed prosperity and peace at the time of Anne Lushan's birth. The death of their ruler in 716, however, led to disorder and chaos, and the Anne's family sought refuge in China. At the time, the policies of Chinese Emperor Huangzong, forgive me for my mispronunciation, who reigned from 712 to 756, were providing opportunities for men such as An Lushan and his cousin An Shishan, and other soldiers of non-Chinese origin to serve in the Chinese armies. Their rise to positions of status and command were further aided after the year 736 by the rule of China's chief minister, Li Linfu, who was unwilling to appoint native Chinese people as generals for fear that they would gain prestige and would enable them to rival his own position at court. Quote, An Lushan's military career took place on the Tang China's northeastern frontier in what is now Liaoning province. The first occurrence of his name in the Tang annals is under the year 736, when, as an officer, he lost his force through rash conduct and was initially condemned to death. Luckily, he was pardoned and afterwards rose rapidly in rank, receiving his first independent command in the year of 742. End quote. As a military governor, Lushan became a political figure. He would make frequent visits to the capital and even became a personal friend to the emperor. By the time of Minister Li Linfu's death in 752, Lushan had accumulated 3 frontier provinces under his command and was the most powerful general in the empire. End quote. But all good things must come to an end. His friend and ruler Li Linfu had died, and a struggle for the metaphorical throne ensued. An Lushan, the most powerful general, and Yang, cousin to the late emperor, both attempted to seize control. Although Yang may have had the more rightful claim to power and control the capital where he lived, many people had grown to trust, love, and rely on Lushan. Plus, the armies he commanded of his 3 frontier provinces were loyal to him and to him alone. Yang, quote, was unsuccessful in his attempts to establish a counter-military base in his provinces or to undermine An Lushan's position in the northeast. He only succeeded in basically poking the bear. Finally, towards the end of the year 755, Lushan turned his large, war-hardened army inward and marched on Luoyang, the eastern capital of Tang China. End quote. His revolution, uprising was officially in full swing. Within a month, the rebel forces had taken the eastern capital, and at the beginning of the lunar year 756, An Lushan proclaimed himself the new emperor of the great Yan dynasty. As they marched further inland, loyal Tang forces stopped the rebels in a funneled pass near what is called the Yellow River. For 6 months, these 2 forces waged war with neither side gaining an inch on the other. Quote, It seemed for a time that this would be as far as it went. An Lushan's rapid advance had left his supply lines thin, and Tang armies and loyalists appeared to hold an advantage that would prevent this advance on the Tang capital itself, Chang'an. Mark Edward Lewis, in his book of the History of Tang, points to a strategic error that led to a catastrophic defeat at the Tong Pass in the summer of 756, allowing Lushan to take the capital and send the Tang emperor fleeing to Sichuan. End quote. After hundreds and hundreds of thousands had died in the fighting, the rebel forces took the Tang capital and appeared as if they were nearing victory. Yang, who had been forced to retreat from the city even further inland, felt his army weakening, and with nowhere else to turn, he sought the help of his allies named the Uighurs, Uighurs. These fighters helped push back the rebel forces over the next year, keeping Yang's hopes alive until something unexpected happened. As rapid as his ascent was, An Lushan's fall was just as fast. The capture of the Tang capital was a massive event, but no further successes followed. Tang armies and the allies thwarted several rebel advances, and in early 757, just a year after declaring himself emperor, An Lushan was assassinated. And no, it wasn't by any of his labeled enemies. His eldest son, An Shinzu, conspired with other generals to have him murdered and take over his position as a leader of the rebellion. Quote, the An Lushan rebellion lasted for 8 years and devastated the Tang Empire. Estimating the true amount of casualties is difficult. Some place the death toll as high as 36 million, which if were true, would have been about 1/6 of the world's population at the time, end quote. However, more recent studies have shown that number to be a bit smaller, yet still very significant. And finally, in the year 763, the rebellion finally came to an end. A major role in the defeat of the rebels was played by the contingent sent by the Uyghurs, as I mentioned above. By this time, the Tang government was much too exhausted to undertake a thorough cleansing of rebel territory, and the surviving rebel generals were allowed to surrender and remain in command of the regions they occupied in return for a nominal submission to Tang. Other parts of the country fell under the control of Tang generals who were almost as insubordinate as the formal rebels were. The second half of this Tang dynasty and the following 5 dynasties period were troubled by a chronic warlordism that only came to an end with the rise of the Song dynasty in 960. The Lushan rebellion effectively ended the Tang dynasty, though it lingered on in name for roughly 150 years after its end. End quote. Lushan's rebellion may have been short-lived, relatively speaking, but the consequences of his actions lived on for centuries. And possibly the most important change brought about was the decentralization of power in China. His uprising allowed regional powers to grab hold and fight against a central authority. Quote, the regionalism within China cannot be placed at the feet of Lushan, yet the divisions sown by the rebellion in the year 755 put an end to one of China's golden ages, and a Chinese state would not approach the power or expanse of the Tang Empire for another 600 years, until the Ming dynasty replaced the Mongol Yuan dynasty, end quote. The Tang dynasty is often said to be one of the most powerful in Chinese history, and I like to think that if not for Lushan's rebellion and the regionalism that occurred afterwards, the Tang dynasty could be remembered as inherently as the Roman Empire. I know it's like comparing apples to oranges, very different circumstances, but the Tang dynasty technically had more landmass under its control at the height of power, although much of it was uninhabitable, and in contrast to that, the Roman population was larger and more centralized. Sorry, I'm rambling. Like I said, I could talk about this for hours. But that, my friends, is the story of the Lushan Rebellion. Very different story today, but it's good to broaden my horizons. I learned more researching this story than I have in a very long time. I just hope you all found it somewhat interesting too, that's all. Thank you all again for taking the time out of your day. Truly means the world. Stick around for a bit of a uplifting bonus story today after the music. Okie dokie. Bye-bye. Love you. Hello. How about a bit more positive story to end today? This comes from CBS News. I forgot to write no, I didn't. There was 3 authors. I chose not to write all 3 names down because I was lazy. But I'll quote, C.J. Rice, a man who served more than 12 years behind bars for an attempted murder he was falsely convicted of, was officially exonerated at the Juanita Kidd Stout Center for Criminal Justice in Philadelphia. C.J. Rice, formerly known as Charles J. Rice, was convicted in a September 2011 shooting for an attempted murder and sentenced to 30 to 60 years behind bars. According to the Pennsylvania Innocence Project, the South Philly shooting left a woman identified as Latrice Johnson, a 6-year-old girl, and 2 others injured. Johnson called 911 after the shooting and described the suspects as 2 men running away in hoodies and black sweatpants, but she couldn't fully identify them. Through an initial investigation with victims in the hospital, Rice's co-defendant, Tyler Linder, was identified as one of the shooters. Detectives interviewed Johnson while he was in the hospital, and she identified 17-year-old C.J. Rice as one of the shooters running away, even though she hadn't seen the teen in years. In her description, Johnson said that Rice was wearing a hoodie and that she was able to see his full face and long braids poking out of the side of a hood. However, officials with the PA Innocence Project said Rice's arrest photo depicted him with cornrows flush against his head, and the case against Rice was built from there. Philadelphia DA Larry Krasner said that his office is dropping all charges against Rice, claiming the evidence used against him at trial was weak. One of his defense attorneys, Carl Schwartz, said the conviction ultimately came down to Rice's ineffective counsel at the time, which was a court-appointed attorney. In November of 2023, the U.S. District Court vacated Rice's conviction and sentence after conceding that he was entitled to relief after experiencing ineffective counsel assistance. According to the PA Innocence Project, Rice has been out on bail since last December. And more recently, the PA County Court of Common Pleas granted the motion to dismiss all charges against Rice, officially making him a free man. Members of these innocence projects, such as Wiseman, Schwartz, Munger, Tolles, and Olson, who had all represented Rice, said, quote, "We are thrilled for CJ that his 12-year journey through wrongful conviction has ended. While an exoneration cannot make up for the time he lost, it creates an opportunity for him to move forward with the next phase of his journey." DA Krasner said the PA DA's office chose not to pursue this case because they could not prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Rice was their guy. He said if the DA's office did choose to pursue this, they would likely have lost, end quote. And that, my friends, is the happy new beginning of CJ's story. I hope you all enjoyed today's episode, a bit more historical and lighthearted, but a nice little palate cleanser. But thank you all again, truly, for taking the time and listening in today. And with that, I will see you on Monday. Okie dokie. Bye-bye. Love you.